All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we have our next panel, Cybersecurity in Fintech, Safeguarding Data and Privacy in an Increasingly Connected World. We're already inviting our panelists up on stage. We have our moderator up on stage, and we'd like you all to kindly give her a round of applause. We have Ms. Gowree Gokhale, partner Nishith Desai Associates. And now joining her up on stage, our panelists, let's invite Dr. Sanjay Bahl, the Director General in Indian Computer Emergency Response Team. I'd like to invite Mr. Sanjay Bahl up on stage. Let's have a big round of applause, please. Once again, Dr. Sanjay Bahl joining us. Thank you so very much, sir. I'd like to welcome Mr. V. Shankar, Managing Director and CEO at Maximus Infoware Private Limited. Let's have a big round of applause, please. Ladies and gentlemen, to those of you at the back of the hall, may I request you to kindly settle down. If you are a part of this session, I do request you to kindly settle down. Thank you so very much. I'd like to invite up on stage Mr. Milan Naik, the founder at Goals 101. Let's have a big round of applause. Thank you so very much for joining us, sir. I'd also like to welcome up on stage Mr. Rajesh Thapar, the Executive Vice President at Axis Bank. Let's have a round of applause and welcome him up on stage. And finally, I'd like to welcome up on stage Mr. Ambuj, Bhalla, CISO at BharatPe. A big round of applause. And we also have Mr. Sandeep Tiwari, Senior Specialist, National Payments Corporation of India. Let's have a round of applause and welcome all our esteemed panelists up on stage. Thank you so very much, each and every one of you. And of course, we have Mr. Sanket Sarkar, founder at ZERON. Thank you so very much, sir. Let's have a round of applause, please. And ladies and gentlemen, may I request those of you who intend to be a part of this discussion to kindly settle down. Of course, once again, please, if we can switch our phones to an offline mode. And with that, I hand over to Ms. Gowree Gokhale to kindly take this session forward. Thank you.
Thank you for the introductions. We are so close-knit that there is hardly any space left for us to have any attack on us. So yes. So thank you for joining in large numbers. When I entered, I saw that this entire conference is really buzzing. Fintech definitely is buzzing in India. In fact, even yesterday, I was at a panel where Australian delegation is here, the Fintech delegation, and there also we had very interesting discussions. This particular panel will focus on cybersecurity, cyber fraud, data protection. As all of us are aware, in the connected world, I'm not going to give you numbers. All of you know the numbers, but we have seen increasing cyber attacks. At the same time, we have seen regulations that are, looking at us, sort of to comply. We have Dr. Bahl here from certain, the new certain guidelines that came in. Of course, we did have rules of 2013 for compliance, but there was minimal compliance on cybersecurity. So the directions definitely help to create that awareness. We also have a new data protection law, which was passed on August 11th. All of these provisions, if you see, they don't specify or are not very prescriptive to see what amount of security or what type of security should we sort of adopt. It is more focused on compliance, which is self-driven compliance, right? So that is what, even if you hear the ministers, etc., they will all say that we want industry to figure out and then comply, create self-regulation standards, etc. And then we also have the Reserve Bank of India, which all of you, directly or indirectly governed, which also, came out with no data storage, right? So data minimization is the principle. So in this scheme of things, we are going to discuss about 7-8 topics. The intention of this panel is to give a lot of, inputs on the way forward. We are not going to look at what has happened, but way forward. So with that, when we talk about fintech, the first thing occurs to me is innovation, right? You have, amazing user experiences. All of us on a daily basis encounter that. But at the same time, you have these irritants, I would call them irritants, which in the nature of cyber threats, cyber attacks, data breaches and the like. So when you have to balance out these two things, what is the approach? What are the principles that govern the fintechs or how the industry looks at it? I would request Rajesh, Shankar, Milan and Sanket to, one by one, just throw some light on this specific issue.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, primarily in my view, typically for fintechs and any other financial entity for that matter, and there is a constant tiff that keeps happening with business and the security function. She'd use the word irritants. So we are one of those who are the guys irritant, as the business calls us, primarily because we put hurdles. Where and what are the things which are their priorities and against which we have our view on? Data minimization is the word which he mentioned is the way forward. Why do we need? Because typically we were always looking for data maximization. Initially capture as much information as we can. We will see what we want to do with that. There will be some model that will come up later, but let's capture it, right? From an ease perspective, that was good. But from exposure perspective, that's a scary stuff, right? So I'm just comparing around where are the things that needs focus. That maximization is to be changed to minimization. 24/7 is the need of the hour. Customer demands, customer experiences have to be 24/7 up. If you keep 24/7 up, where is the maintenance window? Where is the time to do that proactive stuff to make things happen? When you will patch, the downtimes will not be available. How do you balance these out, right? Another cause of concern. While ease and experience is paramount, we all want it. But at the same time, you have to balance it out with something which will actually make it happen. Your DDoSes and all that of the stuff are always a challenge that keeps cropping up with it. Ease to market, right? And quick time to market is another business, typically a concern. Concern in the sense that that's something which is very important for them. Let me market it quickly. Now, if you market it quickly, that means are you taking shortcuts? Are you looking for design lapses? Are you giving adequate time for the team to test things out? Are the oversights being meshed out? Are the security at design compromised? All those things becomes a question mark when you really say, I want to release almost as the customer demands. And these things do happen practically. So we need to balance these out. Again, I'm just putting those keywords here, and each of us can be a discussion point in itself. The last one is integration. And there's one more which I'll talk at the last, but integration, one of the key things which comes up is, and today we are interconnected world, one of the key themes of this particular event itself is interconnected world. Now we open up our channels, we want to go open banking, API banking, we want to connect with anybody and everybody, we want to connect with partners, fintechs, as a bank, governance entities, government bodies. Once we are creating out, where's the exposure, where's the attack surface? That's going much beyond what you were actually thinking. Are we really ready for that? What are the things that we need to take care of it? If I take all of these aspects which the business may demand and keep the other side in a biased way, then we are inviting trouble. The balanced approach would be, okay, we need this. This is what we can do. To this extent we can, but never compromise on your assessment cycles. Never compromise on challenging your own controls. Whatever you think is today right may not be right tomorrow. So keep challenging it. And the last one, which typically keeps haunting us, is a peer pressure, right? So I mean, as a banker, I normally get that, and many of you working on this side of the table would be syncing up with me. If I tell the right controls, business comes back and say, oh, if I put all these controls, the client will run away from me because my peer is allowing all that in a particular way, which may be foolproof, which may not be foolproof. See, are we ready for that? Is the ecosystem not collectively responsible to bring things up and make things happen? So these are some food for thought. I mean, right, we are just starting our discussion. Maybe next 50 minutes, you will keep hearing some of these, and more so from that perspective.
Thank you. I think when others are answering, since you already mentioned third-party vendors, maybe you can combine, in your answer, even the arrangement with the third-party vendor. How do you manage? Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And first and foremost, thanks a lot for being a part of this graveyard session, lunchtime, and still have a full house. So really appreciate that. I think, just to put things in context, right? In reality, if you really think about it, I was attending the keynote session by the finance minister, and it's interesting to note, and I was consciously kind of trying to hear about the fact, she emphasized on the need for cyber resilience, cybersecurity, and in her address, I literally counted it. She mentioned it 4 to 5 times. So it clearly sort of, it's a writing on the wall that for a thriving fintech, ecosystem, it's imperative to build in cyber resilience and robustness in the overall environment, right? So that's clearly, the need of the hour. I don't want to get into the whole, numbers, as Gowree mentioned. We all know, where fintech is, where it's heading, and so on and so forth. But I want to focus surely in terms of to set the context, the rails that are currently sort of coming at play, and how they are sort of in a way influencing or impacting vulnerability at the grassroots level. So if you really think about it today, you have about 700 million smartphone users in the country. If you see the telco penetration, and people talked about the digital divide, in reality, I think it's quite an inclusive sort of a game today, with urban population close to 600 million connections, in the rural side, 500 million connections. So practically most of the country is already connected in many ways. The payments ecosystem, and I was attending another session by Rajan and Nitin, and Nitin was talking about the entire UPI framework and the ambition going forward. I mean, they're talking about 10 billion transactions a month. Now, what that really means is that when you start seeing the entire environment around us, a lot of the growth in the recent past has been extremely inclusive, and it's largely driven out of digital revolution that's touching on commerce, payments, and identity. So it, in a way, aligns also with the Trishul of the government, right, which is Aadhaar, UPI on the transaction side, and ONDC now on e-commerce. So given that sort of a backdrop, clearly what happens is that if you think about cybersecurity, cyber risks, which earlier was more confined or more sort of, I would say, relevant to enterprises, now when you think about it, is becoming more grassroots, and it's becoming inclusive, where it's not only touching large-scale organizations, but it's touching you and me, our parents, our children, and small enterprises. So it's an inclusive problem and gaining a lot more sort of relevance increasingly going forward itself. Some statistics, maybe sort of, it'll be food for thought for you all. If you really sort of aggregate total cyber crimes in the market, overall, globally, it's about close to $7 trillion. And it would be effectively the third largest economy in the world. When World Economic Forum talks about it, it's part of the top 10 risks globally as well. So clearly, the writing on the wall, it's a fairly big problem to solve for. And Gowree, to your point about, how do we sort of, collaborate or looking at third-party partners to sort of, I think increasingly now what's really happening is there's a thriving ecosystem that's kind of evolving around fintechs and financial inclusion, which in my opinion can drive a lot more comfort and build that level of education, awareness, cyber resilience, not only, like I said, for enterprises, but more importantly for end consumers. I'll talk a bit more about that, but probably I'll give my panelists, fellow panelists a chance as well. Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see, a full house, around the time when lunch is being served outside. We've already, talked about, the transformation that has taken place in fintech. But let's just look at it from the genesis. Like everything, in the economy, and I'm not talking about the digital economy, even the social, side, the social economy, from a single unit, development and economy has grown so that it touches, multiple people. So from purely self-contained, self-sufficient economic activities, the market and the businesses around have grown, so that there is a lot of interconnection between different intermediaries, and that has also enabled scale to happen, and also for the produce, to be made available to the customer at the optimum price. A similar thing has also happened in the digital world. From the banks or the back-end processors, handling everything themselves, and therefore creating a very tightly coupled system. The entire ecosystem itself has opened up, and it is an amalgam, it's a medley of multiple stakeholders who are connected to each other doing their bit. And obviously, when there are so many ecosystem players, obviously there would be a need for regulation. And even though it is said, and this is the common saying, that business is ahead of regulation by about 2 decades. But apart from regulation, what is important in the fintech ecosystem is security. And security is a combination of technology, is a combination of processes, is a combination of discipline, and it is also a combination of self-governance or self-regulation. And like any other business activity, the smartest of the businesses feel that the dark side is ahead of them. The dark market is ahead of them, and therefore it is a challenge for fintechs now to keep up with the kind of cybersecurity issues that crop up, the cyber threats that emerge, because the cyber threats themselves are becoming more and more sophisticated. And therefore, the solutions that have to be found will have to be through technology to some extent, through processes and governance, at the second level. And the third would be also in terms of mitigation. Assuming that a cyber breach has occurred, how does one minimize the impact that that breach has had on that business entity or in that ecosystem? So I think it is a combination of these three that will actually ensure that the dynamism that is there in the market, the dynamism that is there which brings out new products, new UIs, new user experiences, new customer use cases, are not deprived or not stunted because of challenges that are also cropping up, perhaps at a faster rate. This is what I think this panel would consider, because there is also something on risk mitigation. There are also things on technology that one can use for risk mitigation. Having said this, I must say the developments that have happened in India over the last 10 to 12 years have been really heartwarming. And the security measures that have been implemented, either via regulations that have come, or through self-regulation, or because entities in the marketplace that have security as their business, providing solutions to the market players, have helped India be in a much more solid environment on the security front compared to many of the countries outside. I will now leave it to the others to carry on.
Thanks a lot. I think I'm just going to sort of connect the dots here and come to you, Sanket. Rajesh, you mentioned that that you have to convince your businesses sort of to go slow a bit, balance out. Then you have the board. Now the board is supposed to be responsible even under the Companies Act and even under some of the RBI regulations. A lot of responsibility vests at the board. And then you mentioned about at the grassroots level, right? So there is that whole connection or a chain of all the stakeholders, including the third-party vendors, where you need to create a lot of awareness, because unless there is awareness and understanding of the risk involved and therefore the steps required to be taken, nothing will work, right? So, we discussed that you have some quantification of the risk that, one can understand. So, I'm just leading from first question to the other to say that how do you quantify the risk and how do you convince the board and other stakeholders to be part of, this entire exercise that is required to create a resilience network?
Sure. First of all, lovely to see a houseful audience, right, in this hour. Again, repeating the same things what the other co-panelists said. But having said that, I'd just like to put some light on the topic which Gowree just mentioned. Cybersecurity is no more just a function of technology. It's a function of business. And the decisions that are made in organizations are just not based on technology, which is also a point on the first question, which was balancing between innovation and security. Now, how to take these informed decisions, right? Because it's just not the CISO or the CIO or the head of security who's just involved in that decision. The finance department is also involved. The operations is also involved. The top management is also involved. In case of like mid-sized startups or growing startups, then the board is also involved. Each of them look into cybersecurity from a different perspective. It is very important that all of them see it from their organizational context. Now, what do I mean by that? every organization is different. Every organization is unique. Even if we were in the same payment gateway industry, two organizations are different, how they operate, what are the business goals, and to that extent. What is that one thing that every management understands? Anyone? One thing that every top management of every organization understands. Money. You go and tell them, we have 50,000 vulnerabilities. The response would be, okay, now what? You go and tell them, we have cyber risk of $50,000. To mitigate that, we need to invest $10,000. The sign-off for the budget approval would happen on a much faster rate. Now, how it's exactly done or how we do it, I'll just give a brief context on that. There are different models that are there in the industry which US follows and all, but that does not apply to every market. There's something called Monte Carlo simulation and the FAIR model, which is very unfair, by the way. Right, because it takes 42 assumptions for doing your risk quantification. So what we did was we took a cost function, which is known as the Gordon-Loeb model, and we put 5 parameters into it. It took us 2.5 years of research to do it. We take 5 parameters. 1, which sector the organization belongs to. 2nd, what are the number of employees that are there, because that consists of the insider threats. 3rd, what are the different technologies that you are using? So take, for example, when Log4j was at spike, the Java applications were at a higher risk of getting exploited. 4th, the different locations from which you are operating. Why is that important? Supposingly, a particular organization had their office in Ukraine while the Russia-Ukraine war was going on. So the probability of getting that breach is much higher than any other place in the world at that point of time. The last but not the least, the market capitalization by that particular organization, because that essentially adds on to the financial impact that it gets into. With that, the impact of the mid-cap and the large-cap indexes are also taken into account so that we have an idea of the economical state of that particular nation. So it's a different thing that you get with respect to each nation, each region, each organization. When you have that kind of insights, you can make those decisions in your organization. Should I invest in this particular thing, or should I expect in that particular thing? Right? If a particular policy implementation on your existing HIDS, which is host intrusion detection system, is giving you 30% more efficiency, you do not need an XDR. If it's not, then you need to implement an XDR. Just to sum it around, I was just having conversation with few of the organizations, and people generally have a very general notion, it's that cybersecurity is costly because you are not getting into the data. Right? Implementation of cybersecurity is costly. If you do it in a strategic way, it's not. There are very basic things, just covering the first answer to the first question as well, which you can do as organizations. There are simple plugins when you are coding itself, which checks for your OSP top 10. It's a basic hygiene checks. You can subscribe to the certain guidelines that are there who send you regular updates on the threat intels that are there, which you can keep on updating. These are basic. It does not cost you anything. It's absolutely free of cost. So that kind of risk quantification and with respect to each risk scenarios is something that is very important. And one more thing, people often I see put a lot of stress on, we follow all the regulations that are there. Just to give an trivia fact, SEBI was formed after Bombay Stock Exchange, a lot of decades later. Regulations only come when there is an incident. It does not come before. Right? So making those informed decisions with those quantified risks is very important to have a smooth trajectory.
Thanks a lot. I think you put it across quite well, how to sort of map the risk and what are the parameters. So Ambuj and Sandeep, over to you on your thoughts on basically, how to get a buy-in from all the stakeholders, and also please focus also on the, educating the masses.
Right. Thank you, Gowree. So yeah, as Sanket rightly put out, that cyber quantification is something really important. But most important thing is how you articulate your key risk indicators. Now, as a CISO function, my key responsibility should be that I jot down my key risk indicator in a fashion that everybody in the board understands that every stakeholders within the organization has to understand it. So what principle as a CISO function that we follow is that we look into a lot of technology inputs from our sides. There are EDR agents, there are multiple perimeter security, threat intelligence, a lot of things come to us. So the analogy I can draw over here is from the perspective that you consider yourself as a pilot. So when a plane is flying, a pilot looks into so many things. He looks into the height, altitude, air pressure, wind direction. But to the customer, he need to tell that when we are going to reach the destination, right? How much time it is going to take. And if there is a turbulence, that has to be told in advance. So those are the parameters that you have to keep in mind when you articulate this key risk indicators for the organization. And that helps you in articulating it very appropriately and get the buy-in from the people, because you are not bombarding them with the information like XDR, vulnerabilities, this and that. What you need to tell them is something actionable. So that is what we, from the CISO function perspective, should follow as an organization to get the buy-in from all the stakeholders from the board and everywhere.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is to each stakeholder explain in their own terms, basically, right? I mean, what they will understand. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, a very good afternoon to all of you. I think a couple of things that I believe is very much needed, when cybersecurity requires to connect at an organization level. I think we have all been discussing that senior management and board need to have a buy-in in cyber matters, but the perspective out here is that how effective is that engagement? And to bring that engagement, I think a couple of things that are needed, right? One is that how effectively you engage and educate your board members and the senior members on the cyber matters, right? It may not be very apt if you look at doing all technical discussions, because they will hardly understand. You need to have a very constructive dialogue, making them understand in a business language and get their buy-in into what your cyber strategies are. Second important factor that I believe is that it's all about fostering cybersecurity as a culture within the organization, right? Cybersecurity is not a CISO's or a CISO function's job. It has to connect at all layers in the organization. And every individual and a person has a specific role to play in the cyber matters. I think as a cyber function, very important for you is to basically define your strategy, discuss the strategy with the senior management, and get their buy-in into your security strategies. The aspects that will be needed is how effective is the implementation of the cyber investments that you went, and demonstrate them to your senior management. I think a paradigm shift from looking at return on investments is making risk-based security investments will obviously help you in getting the buy-in from the senior management. And lastly, I believe that I think resiliency and availability of a business is not a single man's responsibility or single function's responsibility, and all departments have a role to play. And such prerogatives are to set forth in the organizations such that you are, in today's times, you are like always, there was a mention of 24/7. So you have, as a business, have to define how will you want to be resilient in times of a cyber event.
I think that's very important, because what we have noticed is, especially for the startups, some of you may be in that phase where you are raising capital, you have investor, sort of board, sort of managing or, taking decisions. So what we are also doing is, as a part of our firm, that we are trying to educate the board, investor board, because unless the investor board realizes the importance, they may not actually agree for those type of investments. Even, it may appear disproportionate at the inception, but those are required for a long-term sustainability, right? So I think that education, and the other one I think want to once more sort of emphasize that even under the Companies Act, the board may actually suffer individual liability if they don't pay attention to this. So this aspect, even on the legal side, needs to be understood by the board members, right? I think all of you mentioned about strategies and all of that. So, what are the best practices that we are noticing? And some of the people will be, technical people here. So even if you want to talk about some technologies that are evolving. So Rajesh, I'm coming to you now back again to sort of understand, are there any, sort of core things that the audience should take away from a strategy implementation, whether on the technology side, best practices we mentioned about data minimization, use of blockchain, if you can just sort of throw some light on that.
Yeah, thanks, Gowree. See, from strategy perspective, one thing I just want everybody to notice, there's no one size fit all. I mean, it's not a copy paste. You can copy paste tools, you can copy paste configurations, but you can't copy paste strategy. So you have to do first your own risk assessment with a mindset that what exposure do I carry? What is my risk appetite? I mean, first define your risk appetite. Basis that, agree on first what are the risks that you are living with, what is it that you can live with, and what needs to be mitigated. Your strategy should only be driven after you have done your risk assessment. That should be granular. That should be oriented to the compliances that apply to you. That should also take care of what is the organizational risk appetite. If your organization, suppose it's a regulated entity, or you have a client-facing role where you cannot even have maybe from RPO RTO perspective, or maybe a breach perspective, you can't afford a single incident. Your strategy will be totally different than an entity which is rating itself on a different parlance, not a compliance-driven organization. So one, agree on what is it that you want to set right, get that buy-in from your leadership, then drive that down. Now, what are the strategic things which typically can fit into that? While I'll not talk on the strategy, I leave that to each one's wisdom here. But some of the key things which I see over last few years, how it is transforming because of the digital transformations, because of the compliance, because of the regulations, because of the attack surface, because of incidents that are happening elsewhere. Three key areas which I feel are the focus ones. One is the data minimization, which is important considering also with the PDP which recently has been signed off. Now, what does that minimization mean? I'm giving a contrast to what I started with, the data maximization, which typically we believe is always good for capturing a lot of information. In a minimization, figure out what you actually need for that, right? Cut down whether it is an online form or an offline form. Don't wait that digitization or a PDP is insisting only on an online or a digitized form. I'll do it offline. Even if it is your hard copy, even if it is your online form, even if it's a web form, whichever form is, what information do you actually need? First, minimize that. When you minimize it, have the intent also documented. Purpose limitation is an important area there. Are you clearly telling the customer what are you taking this data for? What are you going to do with this data? And then you drive its path forward. The next element in data minimization would be, once you have captured this data, do you understand how this data is going to flow within your organization? Have you created a structural data flow analysis which gives you an inventory, which tells you what data is leaving your organization, whether the basic protection controls are there in place, whether the retention guidelines are there in place, because you should not be retaining beyond the purpose of it. That's again an element of minimization. So a minimization can work out from various angles, but these are some of the key elements which I think one should think in, and it becomes very important for us. Would make, I mean, considering the PDP implementation, and today I was just reading a article which was saying the Minister of the Minister of State for this, Mr. Rajiv, had already said that 6 months will be the time given for organizations to implement it. 6 months is too short for a larger organization where the data inventorization would be a significant exercise in itself, right? But if that comes in, first thing is to work out a play on minimization. The second element which I want to touch upon, which should definitely be in your strategy. Leave aside, again, I'm not touching your threat intels, red teaming, and all that stuff, which I believe is basic hygiene that all of you would be necessarily putting in place. The second leg, especially from a fintech and a financial perspective, which is important to be targeted as, is authentication layer. The large number of breaches are happening around identity thefts. There are a lot of weaknesses that are typically seen on the identity layer. Now, what is it that is happening? And there are a lot of research, a lot of product sets, a lot of things which are happening on strengthening the authentication, whether it is the typical traditional password-based authentication. Can I go for a password-less authentication? Can I go for a biometric authentication? or I go for a behavioral based authentication. Now, all these things would be or should be important for you, considering what is coming to you. How do you claim the guy on the other side is the person? And it is going beyond it. It is no longer the guy on the other side. It is a system on the other side, or it's an application on the other side. Go for API security when you think through your components on the other side totally differs. Now, how is the keys being exchanged? Again, a part of authentication. So that authentication leg is an important element according to me, which should fit into your strategy, wherein you have to maybe challenge what is currently being worked upon and with what is coming up further. And the last element, which in the interest of time, I'll just slip over to, is the blockchain and the cloud and all that stuff. And before I come to the emerging technologies, but blockchain is one good area to explore. But again, whether it is a private blockchain or are you going with a trusted party's blockchain? Blockchain inherently has good benefits. You can ensure immutability, you can trace the transaction, the fraudulent come down, identity-based platforms are riding a lot on blockchain. But that itself has vulnerability. So you have to balance it out. It's not that I buy blockchain or I put a blockchain platform in my environment, everything goes safe. That's not the case. You have to invest in the security controls of that. And if I come to the emerging technology, the last part of Gowree's question, what I see is what are the areas that typically the organizations are investing in, would be investing in. One definitely is the threat intel. You need visibility. You need to know what is not happening right. You may be protecting what you know, but what you don't know is an unknown. I mean, that may haunt you someday. Be sure that you are ready for that. Red team is an important area. Cloud is another area. AI-based tools, because you cannot have people deployed in your SOC or your threat intel anomaly-based detection tools and all. It has to be AI-driven, which picks up anomalies, which baselines and gives you that intelligence back. So a lot of research, a lot of things are being worked upon, but on the threat vector side, we importantly should invest into these to strengthen the environments. These emerging technologies would matter to the organizations at large. And that's all. I think I'll come back to you.
I think thanks for that. Before I go to Shankar and Sanket on the additional points, Dr. Bahl, we have been discussing about even the third party, that the fintechs sort of, or even for that matter, banks maybe, partnering with. How do you, whatever has been said, by panel members, how do you ensure that third parties are equally part of your strategies?
Okay, let me start by first saying I'm excited that I'm not standing between you and lunch. Yeah, that's an important question about third party. You have to identify, prioritize, remediate, monitor the risks of third party, report that back to business as to this is the issues that you are seeing. So the important point is, do you want them to be trusted partners or do you see them as just a vendor? Your whole strategy is going to be dependent on that. If you see them as a vendor, you should be happy with having contractual agreements. And you'll be taking care of whatever goes wrong, right? And in your wisdom with your lawyers, etc., whatever you have drafted. But if you see them as trusted partners, and that is what you see today, the world is talking about trusted supply chains, etc., then you have to understand clearly how you're going to audit them, how are you going to assess them. Will they allow you to audit them? If you have a certain amount of trust level, they will. If you see them as a vendor, you will not be allowed. Take the example of if you are going on a cloud, can you go and audit Microsoft, Amazon, whoever is giving you the cloud services? Then the second is, based on whatever you've done in terms of audits and assessments, what is your assessment of the risk from these trusted, so-called trusted partners that you have? Can you stop there? No. You will have to carry out, you have to understand that there will be some incident, there will be some breach, there will be some issue. And somewhere or the other, they will be involved. So you will have to carry out certain amount of mock exercises and drills. So how do you make them participate in your mock exercises and drills? So that once they participate, you know exactly how they would react to a particular situation that you are unfolding in front of them. That will also help you understand what are their incident response mechanisms, capabilities, etc. Once you understood these, you will also be able to understand that in case something happens at so-and-so trusted partner's place, what is the cascading impact it will have across your business? Who are the other people you will have to get into the room immediately? And then you have to decide what is the sort of rating you want to try and give each of them. So you need to have a scorecard with everyone rated as to on different parameters as to where they stand, where they don't stand. And you have to decide what is the baseline that you want to maintain. And if someone is falling below that baseline, how do you help them come up towards that baseline? Or if they are not able to come up, then you have to take a business call as to whether you want to continue with them or not. So those are some hard decisions you will have to take. But first you will have to try and help them because you've taken them as a partner. So that will make sure that your supply chain is resilient, it is secure. And we've also given out some, Gowree mentioned about directions which were 2022 in April 28th. But we also gave out some guidelines in June 2023. So there are some things mentioned there about third party, etc. So I would encourage you all to go through those. Though those are meant for the government, but definitely you can also learn from that.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Bahl. I mean, that particular document that Dr. Bahl mentioned is extremely interesting and very well written, so would encourage everybody to read that. Over to you, Shankar and Milan, Sanket, if you can just quickly, we just got a sort of warning on time, 15 minutes. We have a couple of things to cover additionally, so if you can just talk about the strategies as well as third party if you want to add anything.
Yeah. Rajesh has already covered many of these strategies. I would just like to add to what he has mentioned. I think zero trust is going to become, or zero trust architecture is going to become even more important because no user can be trusted, whether he is within the LAN or the corporate network, within the perimeter or outside. And I think that would involve user and device level authentication. The second thing, which is also, very necessary, considering that our computer systems are becoming extremely, fast and efficient, breaking into a code, breaking into a key, is also becoming less daunting. So what perhaps theoretically would take more than 100 years is now possible to be cracked, if the speeds improve with quantum. So quantum safe cryptography perhaps will be a necessity. It is something which we will have to work on. And last, I would like to add is RegTech. I think there is a very close synergy between cybersecurity and RegTech. Automate, as much of regulation as possible so that one is compliant and one is within the bounds of the regulation. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, right, automation of regulations and compliance is something that everyone should look into because that actually cuts your cost, right, in terms of fintech, because cybersecurity is often considered as an overhead. That's one. Second, it's a real life scenario that I'm sharing, right, and which I've experienced with many. It's not a single instance, but many, like around 50, 60 instances where there are fintechs. Now, the backbone of that fintech where they're working is a larger financial institution, right, in most of the cases. Now, this particular fintech is taking a particular service from someone else. I'm a hacker by heart, by the way. It's been like 12 years I'm in the field of hacking, right? I've worked. I'll be very open. There's nothing called ethical hacking. There's nothing called ethical hacking, Right. Now, as a hacker, if I have to hack that financial institution, which is my sweetest spot? Is the financial institution infrastructure or the fintech infrastructure? So if I crack the fintech infrastructure, I can get into the larger financial infrastructure. There was a particular topic with the interest of time which we could not cover, but I'll just touch base on that, which was globalization of the financial sector, the fintech sector that India is going to. I was working with a particular client who is working with one of the Fortune 500 companies, and he particularly mentioned this. If you are to connect to my data lake, the level of your security has to be higher than the level of security that we have. Because if anyone wants my data, they would hack you because you are a sweet spot to them and not us. Because they would know that we have got our grounds covered, but you won't. So that is something which would actually go onto a fourth-party risk. We often talk about third-party risk. There are a lot of tools about that. But fourth-party risk is something that's going to come and it's already there. And that's something that is really going to be concerning. Right? So just would like to end on that note.
Thanks. I think we spoke a lot about risk and how do you mitigate or manage risk is by insurance. So, Milan, if you can quickly throw some light upon, where is India in terms of do we have good products in India for insurance? Is that sufficient? What more?
Sure, Gowree. I think, I know in the interest of time, but quick show of hands, how many people have experienced cybercrime or any kind of cyber activity that you would have experienced some way, some form? Just quick show of hands. It would have inbox, email, WhatsApp, some random calls coming in, a lot of people. How many have insurance over here, cyber insurance? One person, two people, three. Literally, that's the case, right? So while, a lot of my co-panelists have talked about how enterprises are working really hard to ensure there is enough and more protection and resilience given to consumers, do we know that 78% of the hacks are more at the individual and SME levels? Large-scale enterprises have resources, tools, monies to invest into this, whereas it's the last mile which is actually where the biggest vulnerability lies. Do we know that 80% of cyber compromises happens because of the individual himself? We know the Jamtara scam. We know all of those crimes exists. And for a fintech ecosystem to really thrive, what becomes imperative for large-scale enterprises, for companies like ourselves and everybody else, is to drive education and awareness and make them aware of the fact that one should not do what they want, in the sense, not participate in some of these conversations. But the good news is the fact that there's a whole infrastructure has been created over here to ensure that the financial ecosystem, financial inclusion becomes a lot more robust. And there are companies like, say, Box Insurance, which works on a very, very holistic framework, which all the way goes from predict, prevent, respond, and buy the insure. And with the intention over here is to give the individuals and small businesses the tools that hopefully they don't need that insurance. But if insurance were to come in, I think then in that case, they at least have the resilience. But, Gowree, to the point, insurance companies have doubled up on this. It's an interesting category, relatively new from an actual sciences perspective. But some of that's there's a leap of faith. There is reinsurance capacity being created globally. And the good news is the fact that apart from offering insurance to enterprises, now increasingly there are companies who are also offering protection to even individuals and small enterprises. So yeah.
Yeah, I think thanks for that. And I would recommend, the audience definitely, those who have not explored this space, to know more about it. Now, coming to Ambuj, Sanket, you did mention about, the compliance part, where you have, at the horizontal compliance, like the certain data protection law, then you have a sectoral compliance such as RBI, RDA, SEBI, and then you have global compliances if you have some global exposure, right? So Ambuj, any thoughts on how do you manage this? You did mention about direct tech, that's a way forward, I believe, but any other thoughts?
I believe that in today's time, not only just the business is becoming omnipresent, the customers are all omnipresent, and likewise the threat actors are omnipresent actually. So 4 things that one needs to understand is that not every asset is important to the organization and doesn't require the same level of treatment needed for protection or mitigation. Second important fact is that if I'm making investment in security, I'm secured enough. That's factually not true. You may make investment, but what happens is that if you are not aligning with the basic hygiene factors, you can always be on the verge of getting a cyber event. Third important thing is that my threat actors are only external. You have to do away with that thought. And lastly, just by making investments in best-in-class technologies, I'm like cyber protected. We have to come out of that mindset. Everything and anything starts with the hygiene factors, and if you look at any statistics, it stays that 70% or 80% of the incidents happen because of the hygiene factors. So you should focus on having those cyber factors in place. There are many frameworks available. I think Center for Internet Security is one such benchmark that one can obviously adopt for having things in place.
Thanks.
Gowree, with due permission, just would like to add on that particular thing, right? I guess most of you know it. If you do not know it, there's something called UCF, which is Unified Compliance Framework, which aligns all of these things, right? So it's easy for you, if you have those master sheets with you, to have a unified framework for your compliance monitoring so that you do not have to hassle between the horizontal and the vertical layers of the compliances.
Yeah, thanks for that. Sandeep, over to you now. We did discuss about all these requirements, but with the talent that we have in the country, do we have enough talent that understands, or skill set that understands these issues to deal with, or do we need to do more on that?
Oh, so talent, that's a difficult question actually. So talent is definitely a challenge from the cybersecurity perspective because, it's an evolving field. So you need to keep on upskilling people within your organization or the people you want to come in to be up at breast with what the current technology evolution that are happening. I just want to quote one example, even from the hackers' perspective. The famous APT groups that are working on. I have been following the journey of Lockbit, which is a famous ransomware right now. What they did actually, so when they launched Lockbit 1.0, they did some damage, and after that, when they wanted to do Lockbit 2.0, they actually made it crowdsourced. On the dark web, they published that they want to do a new version of Lockbit 2.0, and that they went for a crowdsourcing it. For Lockbit 3.0, what they did is that they actually ran hackathons that we have built up a Lockbit 3.0 and we want any EDR or the XDR in the world to do assessment and try to detect us, right? So if you see when the talent perspective, the hackers are pooling the resources. So it is important that all the organizations across who can bring in the talents and train them right? And apart from that, what we do on our side is that we have a very deep tech focus at NPCI. So what we did is that rather than focusing on bringing in the talent, we developed the talent and build. And the most important aspect to do that, to retain the talent and have that, is we have to make people fall in love with the problem. Money, anybody can throw money at the table, right? You will not be able to retain people just by throwing money at the table. To retain the people, you have to ensure that they fall in love with the problem that you are assigning them. So if they like to be part of the solutioning side of it, then probably you will be able to retain them.
Yeah, I think that's what the hackers do also. They just fall in love with the issue. So Dr. Bahl, over to you now to conclude. I know we are sort of getting warning signals, but two quick questions on this talent. And also on the approach on reporting, because the audience needs to know that in India there is a reporting requirement, and what should be the approach, because we often get asked, the risk is not material or the breach is not material. Do we really need to report? What is an expectation from a regulator perspective?
Quickly on talent, I think India has a reasonable amount of talent in cybersecurity at the technical level. Whether it is connected or disconnected, that's a separate issue. Yeah. But I think we have a huge amount of talent, and you can see that because of the sort of startups, etc., which are coming up, and also in organizations, you'll see a lot of talent. Now the question is, do you need more? Obviously, you need more because you're not only doing it for India, but you're trying to do for the world. And that is where there are different programs which are going on, including from the government, things like the Information Security Education Awareness Program, which has more than 50 various engineering institutes who have joined hands, who are training professionals at the B Tech level, M.Tech level, and PhD levels. So you have a couple of lakhs of students coming out in cybersecurity through these programs. But when you're looking at cybersecurity or ransomware, etc., like you mentioned Lockbit and all, is it only about technical aspects that you need to look at? I mean, while you have technical skills available and people available, you also need the people at the management level and board who understand cybersecurity. And that is where some challenges are there. So just for example, last week I was in Mumbai and we were doing a tabletop mock cybersecurity exercise for various board members at SEBI. And it was very interesting to understand different organizations, their board members who were there, what they think, how many were willing to put their neck out and talk about cybersecurity, and how many were hesitant because they thought it was a technology perspective, but the scenarios which were unfolded in front of them, they understood that these are all business decisions and these are nothing to do with technology, but they are going to have a serious impact on how they take a decision. So that is where I think the education awareness is required, and that is why in the management institutes this needs to be introduced. Apart from that, you also have the third pillar, which is the law enforcement. So whether the judiciary understands it, whether the police understands it, and to what depth, because when you have an incident, more or less it will lead towards a crime. And more so when it is involving fintech. So if it is going to involve crime, what is the law enforcement ready for? How will the judiciary address these issues when these go to the court? Or will you have a pile again lying in the courts? And the fourth pillar is about the negotiators. Now, if you have a ransomware, do you want to pay the ransom? If you have a ransomware attack, would you pay a ransom? Yes, no. Yes. You would pay a ransom. You would not pay a ransom. So if you're not going to pay a ransom, would you need a negotiator? Yes, no. Come on, guys, I thought we were not standing between you and lunch. So you guys should be hungry. So you should be able to speak, not having satisfied with lunch and sleeping. Yes, no. Why would you need a negotiator? You decided not to pay the ransom. So bring down the cost for what? Not thinking enough. I just told you there are 4 pillars. So that you can allow at least the third pillar to walk in at some stage, which is the law enforcement, right? You need to catch these criminals. The more you negotiate, you have more chances of them leaving footprints somewhere or the other, and that is what something can be used by the law enforcement to nab them. Okay? So I think I'll stop there on the talent part, but your second part was this incident response. So yes, you need to, when you're looking at incident response, you need to look at identification, whether there is an incident or not. You need to then look at containment of that incident. You need to look at how do you eradicate that incident, how do you recover from that incident. And then you have to look at what are the learnings from that incident. Now, if you have already been attacked, what is it that you should have done better, which would have avoided this sort of a thing? Whether there's a problem in your technology, whether it's a problem in your processes, whether it's a problem at the people level. So any of these 3 which are there, you'll get to know things about it. Next is, how do you communicate this and to whom do you communicate? Within your organization, to the regulators. We are clear expectation from our side is that you have to report an incident within 6 hours to CERT. Why do you need to report it in 6 hours? So that we get to know that something is happening And we correlate with anything else that is happening either in the same sector or across the country, which we think this is going to be systemic and we need to take actions urgently. If it's one-off case, it's a different thing, right? But that is not something which you will be able to decide, because this is something where you are not getting input from the others. This is where the regulator is getting details, and we are in a position to look at that. The next is, how will you and what will you communicate to the media, and who will communicate to the media? Otherwise, you will have all sorts of stories in the media, which you may not be happy with, and those might not be true. I'm not saying the media reports wrong, if the media guys don't take me incorrectly, but I'm just saying that they need to have the facts in place. And then you also have to notify the customers. If there is a data breach or a leak, you need to notify the customers. You have their data, and now with the DPDP bill, etc., the notification is a must. So up till now, people have been pushing it under the carpet, but now notification is necessary. And then reporting, as I said, timely reporting to CERT. This is where then everyone can walk in, help you out, and not just hold you by the neck. I think I'll stop there. If there are any questions, we'll take that up. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I know we had yeah.
15 seconds, sorry for that, but in continuation to what Sir was saying, one point on third party, which we should ensure is that your agreement explicitly put the responsibility on your vendors, partners whom you are engaging with to report that incident to you. Because as an organization, you will not have visibility what has happened at that end, and you would be liable to face the penalties from the regulator, certain or any other party. So make sure that those explicitly are documented, and I agree.
Unfortunately, we'll need to end this panel. I'm sure, the panel members have much more to share. So please feel free. I am talking on everybody's behalf to sort of talk to them after the panel is over. But I would request the organizers to have much larger discussion in the next fest, because this is the topic, the utmost important topic in my view, at least, in terms of the risks involved. So thank you each and every one. I'm sorry we had to cut down the conversation, but I'm happy to converse separately. Over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Next time, I'll make sure we hack the agenda and give you 10 minutes more time. 20 minutes more. All right, we promise that. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause, please. An absolutely amazing session. And we just didn't realize where the time went. But once again, I would like to thank our panelists, all of you, so very much